Every morning, Julian Hale's wife fired him. It happened at 7, more or less, when the summer light came slantwise through the tall bedroom windows and touched her face, and Mara opened her eyes to a stranger. This morning was no different. He was already awake, sitting in the chair by the window where he always waited, close enough to reach her, and far enough not to frighten her. And he watched the exact moment recognition failed to arrive. Her gaze traveled over him, the billionaire she had married, the husband she fell for every night, and found nothing it knew. She sat up fast, dragging the linen sheet to her collarbone, and asked him who he was and why he was in her room. The question had the sharp, practical edge it always had, the voice of a woman who intended to get an answer and then get out. He gave her his name quietly, because quiet was the whole art of the first minute, and told her she was safe, that this was her home. "This is not my home." She looked at the ceiling, the moldings, the enormous windows full of green. Below them the garden breathed jasmine and cut grass through the open sash, and a mourning dove said the same soft thing over and over. "My home has a radiator that clanks and a neighbor who plays the trombone. This is a hotel. Are you the concierge?" He told her he was not. She decided then that he must be staff, an assistant, a driver, whoever they hired to sit and stare, and she swung her legs off the bed, found the marble cool under her feet, and stood with the small wobble she always had before coffee. Her dark hair fell loose past her shoulders. She was 31 and did not know it. Whatever he was, she informed him, he was fired. She meant it. She wanted him out. "All right," Julian said. That was the part that undid the others, the doctors and the household and his own uncle, that he never argued. He rose, buttoned nothing, defended nothing, and crossed to the door in his socked feet, a man worth more than the building he stood in, dismissed by the one person whose judgment he would have paid any price to keep. At the threshold he stopped, because there was one line that always traveled across the wall in her mind, and he offered it gently. There was coffee in the kitchen, when she wanted it, 2 sugars, a great deal of milk. The way she took it, like dessert, the way she always had. Mara blinked. She wanted to know how he knew how she took her coffee. "Lucky guess," he said, and closed the door before she could see his face change. In the corridor, Winnie was waiting with the tray, as she was every morning, the silver already sweating in the heat. She was 61, built like a fence post, and had run this house since before Julian owned it. She asked whether he had been fired again, and on what notice, and when he told her Mara wanted him gone immediately, and had decided the house was a hotel, Winnie only sniffed that Mara thought correctly. 30 rooms, and nobody used the pool. And if it were a hotel, she would at least collect tips. Then something under the dryness softened and hid itself again, and she told him to give Mara the garden today. It was a good morning for it. The heat would not turn cruel until noon. The garden. Yes, he nodded once, and went to rebuild the day. His study was the coolest room in the house, north-facing, smelling of cedar and old paper, and the beeswax Winnie used on the desk. Julian sat and opened the ledger, not a business ledger, though he owned 3 companies and a design house with his name over the door, but a leather book, hand-sized and full of days. Each page held a date and a few lines in his careful hand. What worked? What frightened her? What made her laugh? Which sentences opened a door and which slammed one? July the 9th, she liked the white roses better than the red, said red roses were for apologies. July the 14th, do not mention the sea. July the 19th, yesterday she asked about her mother, and I told her the truth and lost the whole afternoon. Find a gentler road tomorrow. He pressed his thumb to the wedding ring on his left hand, the way he did when a thing hurt and he had decided not to show it. Then he wrote the date at the top of a clean page, a summer Saturday, the 20th, and beneath it, the plan. The accident had been 11 months ago. He made himself use the plain word. There had been a storm at the end of last summer. One of those green skied nights when the air goes still and then breaks. A road along the ridge slick with the first rain in weeks, and their car, and a guardrail, and after that a hospital where machines counted for her, while strangers used words like anterograde and consolidation and prognosis guarded. Her body had healed. The wound they could not photograph had not. She could hold a new day in her hands beautifully, wholly, and then sleep took it, every night, cleanly, the way a tide takes writing from wet sand. She woke each morning to a self who had not yet met him. He had married her 14 months before that storm. So the arithmetic of his marriage was cruel and simple. She had loved him for 14 months and forgotten him for 11, and every morning the forgetting won first. The phone buzzed against the cedar. Dr. Rao, whose name he had learned to both want and dread, did not bother with hello anymore. She told him he had called the office twice yesterday and asked whether something had changed or whether he was frightening himself again. Something changed. Julian turned the ledger back a week to a page he had nearly torn out. Thursday, she said my name. Before I said it. She was half asleep. She thought she was dreaming, and she said Julian like it was an old word, not a new one. A silence came down the line with weight in it. Fragments surface, Dr. Rao told him carefully. It did not mean the wall was coming down. He answered that it could mean it was cracking, and she allowed that it could. Then she chose her next sentence with visible care, the way a person tests a stare in the dark. There was the trial. She had promised not to push it, and she would not. But the window to enroll closed at the end of the month, and after that there would not be another for a year, perhaps longer. It carried risks she did not like. And it needed Mara's consent, real consent, on a day she understood what she was agreeing to, which was its own problem, given the mornings. He told her he knew. She told him to think about it, and not to decide over the phone, and then her voice gentled and she asked how Mara was, right now. He looked out the window. Far below, at the edge of the lawn where the greenhouse threw its glass light, a figure in one of his shirts had wandered out barefoot into the morning, drawn, as she always was, as she had been the day he first saw her 3 years and a whole life ago, to the growing things. He told the doctor his wife had just discovered the garden, and that he had to go and be a stranger she liked, and he hung up before either of them could make it heavier than it already was. He found her among the roses with dirt already under her nails. She had not asked permission. She never did. Not the old Mara, and not this one. She had found the pruning shears on the potting bench, and was deadheading the spent blooms with the unthinking competence of someone whose hands knew a thing her mind had misplaced. The greenhouse breathed around her. Wet earth, green sap, the sharp, bright smell of tomato leaves, the drowsy heat already gathering under the glass. Somewhere a hose dripped. Bees worked the lavender by the door in a low, steady engine of sound. "You're the fired one," she said, not looking up. The staring man. Julian, she tried it, and he made himself not react. Then she informed him that whoever had planted these had done it wrong, that you crowded hydrangeas and they sulked, and that this poor thirsty thing was too proud to say so. She glanced sideways, quick, assessing, and asked whether he was going to stand there or be useful. He said he could be useful. She handed him a trug of clippings and told him to prove it, and moved down the row talking the way she breathed, telling him which of these plants were sulking and which were show-offs. He followed her and held what she handed him and said as little as he could, because the trick was to let her lead, to let her be the one who knew things. She was radiant when she knew things. The condition had taken his marriage, but it had left her exactly herself, quick, warm, allergic to self-pity, incapable of calling herself just anything. She observed that he did not say much. He told her he liked listening to her, and she called it a dangerous habit and said she never stopped. She wiped her forehead with the back of her wrist, leaving a streak of soil, and asked where the lady of the hotel was, the one who owned all this, who must be terrifying, because nobody but a terrifying woman left shears this sharp lying about. His throat did something complicated. The lady of the house was the least terrifying person he had ever met, he told her. She simply was not here this morning. Shame. I'd have liked her. Mara straightened, pressed a hand to the small of her back, and looked at the long green rose she had already tidied, without being asked. For 1 second her face went still and puzzled, the way a person looks reaching for a word on the tip of the tongue. Odd. I feel like I've done this before. This exact, the light, and the bees, and you holding the basket looking like I've broken your heart. She laughed to cover it, and asked, half joking, whether she had done this before. He asked whether she would believe him if he said yes. She grinned and said no, but that she would let him buy her lunch for trying. He would have given her the house. He said lunch he could do. They ate on the terrace, under the striped awning, out of the worst of the sun, and for 40 minutes it was the simplest thing in the world. Winnie brought cold chicken and tomatoes still warm from the vine, and lemonade with the ice cracking as it melted. And Mara interrogated him like a customs officer, and teased the careful way he answered, and Julian, who had not laughed easily since a green-skied night 11 months ago, felt his face remember how. She told him about a greenhouse she was going to open one day, a real one, with a crooked sign and terrible coffee, and every plant labeled in her own bad handwriting. She had told him about it 3 years ago on their second date. He did not tell her it already existed, that he had quietly bought the corner lot downtown and left it standing empty and waiting, because it was her dream to speak, and not his to spend. That was when the car came up the drive. He heard it before he saw it, the low, deliberate crunch of tires on gravel, unhurried. A car that had never once in its life needed to hurry. His whole body knew the sound. A black sedan, then a second behind it, and Julian set down his glass so carefully it made no noise at all. Mara asked if he was expecting company. He said no, and then asked her to do something for him, to go back to the greenhouse, where the tomatoes on the end needed staking, and he was hopeless at it, and he would come and find her in a little while. She caught the change in him she was too quick not to. But she also, being who she was, decided to be kind about it, told him the famous staring man had secrets, and could keep them, and that he owed her a story later. She went barefoot across the hot stone, back toward the glass and the green, and he watched until she was safely inside it before he turned to face the drive. Roland Hale climbed out of the first car, the way a verdict climbs out of an envelope. He was Julian's uncle, his late father's elder brother, chairman of the board Julian had spent a decade politely outmaneuvering. 70, silver, immaculate in linen, the color of bone despite the heat. He came up the terrace steps with 2 lawyers trailing him like a wake and a briefcase that had never carried good news. He surveyed the table, the 2 plates, the wilting lemonade, and remarked how restful lunch looked, and that he had begun to think Julian had forgotten the company had a chairman at all. You could have called, Roland. I did. You've stopped answering. Roland lowered himself into Mara's abandoned chair without being asked, and the wrongness of it made Julian's jaw tighten. One lawyer set the briefcase on the table and opened it with a soft double snap. Frankly, nephew, I've indulged this long enough. Sit. We should talk like men who own things, before the thing we own slips out of both our hands. Julian did not sit. He told his uncle to say what he had come to say. Roland folded his hands and said the board was uneasy, had been for months, that its founder and majority holder had become distracted, distant, reachable only through her. He did not gesture toward the greenhouse. He did not have to. Contracts had gone unsigned. The Meridian deal had collapsed because Julian had not taken a single call for 3 days in May. People were asking whether Julian Hale was still fit to steer the house that carried his name, and Roland, he said, had found it harder and harder to tell them they were wrong. I'm fit. Perhaps, but you're compromised, and the 2 look identical from a boardroom. Roland slid a folder across the table, thick, official, the kind with tabs. The company's stability, he said, rested on a marriage no longer functional in any sense the law recognized. Mara could not remember signing her own name from one day to the next. Her shares, her proxy, her entitlements all sat in a limbo their competitors had already begun to smell. He tapped the folder. Inside was a petition, a quiet one, asking the court to appoint a guardian for Mara's affairs on grounds of incapacity and to place her care in a facility equipped for it. Fernbrook, up the coast, the finest of its kind. It would remove the daily strain. It would settle the shares. It would let the company breathe again. The cicadas soared on in the heat. Somewhere in the glass house, a woman he had loved for 3 years was staking tomatoes and humming, and did not know that her freedom had just been laid on a lunch table in a folder with tabs. "And you'd hold her proxy," Julian said, "as guardian. Wouldn't you?" "Someone competent must," Roland answered, and did not blink, and said it might as well be family. Julian picked up the folder. He did not open it. He weighed it, this quiet violence dressed in linen, and thought about how many mornings he had walked out of a room to keep from frightening her. How much of his life had become the discipline of not fighting. He was very tired of not fighting. He told Roland to take his cars off the drive. "Julian, Fernbrook is 90 miles away." His voice stayed level, which was somehow worse than shouting. The lawyers glanced at each other. "She woke every morning in a place she did not recognize," he said, "with people she did not know. And the single thread he had managed to give her, the single one, was that by nightfall she was somewhere that felt, in her body, if not her mind, like home. To take that and put her in a building where every face would be a stranger's forever, and to call it care, and to sign her name to it because she could not. No. Roland rose, unruffled, gathering his wake, and said the board met on the 30th, that the petition would file that morning regardless of Julian's temper, and that Julian had 10 days to offer a better arrangement or the court would give them all a worse one. At the top of the steps he paused. "Sentiment is not a strategy. She is not coming back. The sooner you grieve that and behave like a chairman, the more of her dignity we can all preserve." He went down to his cars. "My regards to the garden." Then the gravel again, unhurried, receding, and Julian standing alone on the terrace with a folder in his hand and 10 days in his chest like a held breath. He did not go straight to her. He walked the long way, through the house that was too big and too quiet, past the pool nobody swam in flashing its flat blue eye at the sky, and he let his hands stop shaking before he stepped back into the wet green warmth of the greenhouse, because she read faces the way she read plants, and he would not carry Roland in here. She had staked the tomatoes, badly, tenderly, with garden twine tied in bows. It was the most beautiful thing he had seen all day. She told him she had begun to think he had been fired too, and then, seeing something after all, asked what had happened to his face. He said it was nothing, business, and picked up the twine, and told her she tied bows on her tomato stakes. Everything deserves a little ceremony. She took the twine back from him, and her fingers brushed his, and neither of them moved for a second longer than fingers require. The greenhouse ticked with heat. Outside, the afternoon began its slow gold decline, and the light came through the glass and the leaves and landed on the two of them like something poured. They stayed out until the swallows came. That was how the evenings went, and Julian had learned to be greedy for them the way you are greedy at the end of anything. As the heat broke and the sky went peach and then rose over the ridge, Mara, who had woken hating him, began, as she always did, to fall. It was never one thing. It was 100 small ones. It was that he knew when to be quiet. It was that he had carried her a cardigan from the house without being asked when the air cooled, and had not made a thing of it, only draped it and stepped back. It was that when she said something clever he looked at her as though she had hung the evening star herself. They sat on the low stone wall at the garden's edge, with the first fireflies rising out of the long grass, and she studied his profile in the failing light. She reminded him that she had fired him this morning, and he agreed. She said she was not sorry, but that she might be persuaded to rehire him on a trial basis. because the staring was growing on her. Then she went quiet, watching the fireflies write and erase themselves over the lawn, and admitted that this was strange, that she did not remember arriving here, did not remember most of today, that it was all soft at the edges, and that still she felt as if she had been sitting on this exact wall with this exact impossible man her whole life. She turned to him, and the last light was in her eyes, and she was not laughing now. "Who are you, really? Because you look at me like you're saying goodbye and hello at the same time, and I can't work out which." "Both," he said. It was the truest thing he had said all day, and it slipped the guard he kept so carefully. She held his gaze. The dark came up gentle out of the grass. And then Mara reached out and pressed her thumb, lightly, unthinkingly, against the wedding ring on his left hand, the exact place he pressed it himself when a thing hurt, a gesture she could not possibly have seen him make, could not have learned, had no memory to have kept. She murmured that he did this, when he was trying not to fall apart, turning the ring a quarter-inch as if she had done it 1,000 times. Then she stopped. Something crossed her face, quick and deep as a fish under ice, and she asked, almost to herself, how she knew that. Julian's heart went very still and very loud. He asked her, carefully, what else she knew. "I don't." Her hand flew to her temple. It was the old fear, the edge of the cliff look he had seen 100 times when the wall reasserted itself. But this was different. This time she did not fall back from the edge. This time she leaned toward it. "White roses," she whispered. He had given her white roses, not red, because red were for apologies. And there had been a page, a book of days, she had seen it. She asked him, chasing it, why she knew about a book. She had never, not once in 11 months, remembered anything past the moment of waking. Fragments surfaced, Dr. Rao had said, and meant nothing. But this was not a fragment adrift. This was one day reaching back and touching the day before it, and the day before that, a thread-pulling taut where there had only ever been cut ends. He told her it was all right, that he had her, that she should breathe and not chase it, only stay here, with him, right now. She said she was scared, which the old Mara never once admitted, and then, absurdly, she laughed, wet-eyed and wondering, and said no, she was not scared, and that was the strange part. She felt as if she had just found the edge of something enormous in the dark, and it was not a cliff at all. It was a door. She gripped his hand hard and asked whether something was happening, whether something was changing. "Yes," he said, "I think it might be." Above them the first stars came out over the ridge, where a storm had once broken everything, and the fireflies rose, and Mara Hale, who would wake tomorrow morning and fire her husband all over again, held on to his hand as if, for the first time in 11 months, she meant to bring one single thing with her through the dark. And Julian, holding her, thought of the folder on the terrace, and the 30th of the month, and 10 days, and a trial with risks Dr. Rao did not like, and a window that closed at the end of July. "Sentiment is not a strategy," Roland had said. But this crack of light, this thumb against his ring, this door in the dark, this was not sentiment. This was the first evidence, in a year of losing, that the tide might be turning. He would not survive giving her up to Fernbrook. And he would not, now, survive letting this thread go untested either. He waited until she slept. She always slept early, as if the day itself grew heavy and closed her, and he carried her up through the quiet house and laid her down where she would not know him at dawn. Then he went to the study and opened the ledger to a clean page and did not write the plan for tomorrow. He wrote one line. She remembered the ring, and under it, in the careful hand of a man who had just decided to gamble everything he had left, 3 more. Call Rao in the morning. Say yes to the trial, before Roland can stop us both. Outside, the summer night breathed jasmine through the open window, and down the hall his wife slept in a house she would not recognize, carrying, for the first time, the smallest ember of a man she kept forgetting. He pressed his thumb to his ring. 10 days. 1 door. And a wall that, tonight, had finally begun to crack. The call went out before the light did. Julian sat in the study at 10 to 6, with the ledger open to the line he had written the night before, and the sky over the ridge still the color of a bruise going gentle. Winnie had not come with coffee yet. The house held that particular pre-dawn silence, all its 30 rooms breathing, the pool downstairs a black rectangle now, instead of a blue one. He had slept perhaps 2 hours. He dialed the number he knew without looking, and Dr. Rao answered on the second ring, which told him she had not slept much either. She reminded him it was not 7, that he never called before 7, and asked what had happened. Yes, Julian said. That's what happened. Yes to the trial. Enroll her. The line went quiet, and in the quiet he heard her set something down, a cup, a pen, and pull herself fully awake. She told him to say it slower. He told her about the night on the wall, that Mara had found the edge of it, not a fragment, but a thread, that she had pressed his ring the way he pressed it, a thing she had never seen him do, because he only did it once. She had already forgotten the morning, that she had named the white roses and asked about the Book of Days. His voice did not break, but it thinned, the way ice thins before you can see through it, and he said that 11 months had passed, and last night the wall had cracked, and he was not going to sit here and log it in a book while it healed over again by breakfast. Priya Rao said his name gently, and therefore worse, and told him she wanted this too, but that she needed him clear-eyed. The trial protocol needed consent that was informed, competent, witnessed, and renewed at each visit. 6 visits. 6 mornings Mara would wake, not knowing him, not knowing her, not knowing what she had agreed to. He said they would get consent in the good hours, the evenings, when she was most herself. She warned him the ethics board would not accept a consent she could not recall giving the next day, that Roland's lawyers would call it coercion, would call it him signing for her, in everything but ink. Then she gave him the hard thing whole. There was a way through. 1 clear day. If Mara could hold the information across a full waking span, hear it in the morning and still have it that night, agree with the same mind that heard it, that was competence the board could not touch. But they had to catch that day, and she could not manufacture it. She could only be ready when it came. Below the window a mourning dove started its soft 2-note argument. Julian pressed his thumb to his ring and told her the board met on the 30th, that Roland would file a guardianship petition that morning, and that if a court named him guardian first, both their consents would stop mattering. She asked how long they had. 10 days, he said. 9 now. He heard her exhale. Then they were not waiting for the clear day to come to them, she said. They would go and get it. She told him to bring Mara Thursday, baselines, imaging, the works. And then, the professional voice slipping for 1 second, she warned him not to tell Mara tonight what a gift the night before had been. If Mara felt him watching for the miracle, she would perform, and Priya would not be able to tell the door from the wish. She hung up before he could answer, which was her kindness. Julian closed the ledger. 10 to 7 now. The light had come up over the ridge without asking, and down the hall a woman was surfacing toward a morning in which he did not exist. He went to be a stranger, and found that this stranger's morning had changed. She was already sitting up when he came in. That was new. She usually slept until the light reached her face, sitting against the headboard with the linen sheet pulled at her waist, and her dark hair a wreck, and an expression he had never once catalogued in 11 months of cataloguing. Not fear. Not the customs officer wariness. Something snagged. You, Mara said. Me. He stopped by the chair and did not sit, and began to give her his name. She cut him off with it. Julian. Flat. Like a card laid on a table, and then looked appalled at herself. She did not know him, she said. She had never seen him. She would remember a face like a locked door. Her hand went to her temple, that old gesture. But her eyes stayed on him, hunting, and she asked why she had his name in her mouth before he had given it to her. He told her, careful as a man crossing river ice, that she had met him yesterday, that they had had a good day, and that sometimes a little of it stayed. Nothing stayed, she said. And she could feel that nothing stayed. It was the one thing she did know on waking, that she had lost the road behind her. Her voice sharpened the way it did when she was frightened and refused to be, and she asked whether he was a doctor, whether this was a facility, whether she was being kept. The word landed exactly where Roland's folder had left its print. He told her no, that she was home, that this was her house. People in facilities are always told they're home, but she was studying him with that terrible new snag, the thread from last night frayed but not cut, and it made her cruel because it made her afraid. He was not staff, she said. Staff did not look at a person as though she were the last warm thing in a cold house. Somebody should rehire whoever had fired him, and somebody should also have him looked at. He almost laughed. It came out as something else. She had fired him, he told her, yesterday, and most mornings. That sounded like her, she allowed. She swung her legs off the bed, found the marble, wobbled, and he did not reach for her, had trained himself out of reaching, and watched her steady on her own. She caught him not reaching, and filed it. There was a coffee she wanted, she said slowly. 2 sugars, too much milk, and she asked how she knew that, whether he had told her. He said she had told him 3 years ago. She stopped at the window, gripping the sill, looking down at the garden going bright, the greenhouse throwing its low-glass fire across the lawn, and her knuckles whitened. She did not have 3 years with anyone, she said. She had this morning, and a black wall. She told him to stop handing her pieces of a life and watching her face to see if they fit, that it was not kind, that it looked kind and was the opposite. She turned on him, wet-eyed and furious, and entirely herself, and told him that whatever this careful, gentle, unbearable thing was that he was doing, she wanted him to stop, and she wanted him out. All right, Julian said, and went, because it was the only thing that had ever worked. But at the door he did not give her the coffee line. He gave her nothing. He shut the door on a woman who had woken today already fighting the wall, and for the first time in 11 months, that was worse than waking blank, because a blank Mara did not suffer the wall. This one did. Winnie was in the corridor with the tray, the silver sweating in the heat that was already climbing, and she told him he looked grey. He said Mara had woken knowing his name, and hating that she knew it, that the thread had held overnight, that some of it had held, and that it had hurt her. Winnie was quiet a moment, which from her was an eloquence, and then she said the coffee would stay in the pot until Mara asked, and that he would eat something before he went and did whatever it was that had put that folder in his study. She had dusted around it, she added. She did not dust around good news. She started away, then stopped, and remarked that 30 rooms sat in this house, and the 2 of them kept finding the same 6 feet of garden to break their hearts in, and that if it were a hotel she would charge him for the wall. That was the wry mercy of her. She left him almost able to breathe. By evening the tide had turned again. As it always did, the wall could not hold the whole day, only the waking hour, and by the time the swallows came, Mara had forgotten she had fought him, and remembered only, in her body, that his quiet was safe. He had learned to be grateful and not greedy. But tonight he had 9 days and a door to walk her through, and so, on the stone wall with the fireflies rising, he did the thing Dr. Rao had told him to do gently, and could not do gently at all. He asked her to try to carry something to tomorrow. She looked at him sidelong, lemonade sticky and calm, and said that was a strange ask from a man she had met this morning. He said he knew how it sounded. She told him to tell her anyway, that she was brave after sundown and only a coward in the mornings, and to go on and frighten her properly. So he told her, not everything, not the marriage, not the storm, not the 11 months, Rao had warned him the whole truth at once buckled her, and the ledger's July the 19th was written in that lesson. But the shape of it, that she had an injury the eye could not photograph, that each night took the day's new roads, that there was a treatment, new and unproven, with a window closing at the month's end, and that it might teach the days to hold hands across the dark. She listened the way she pruned, unflinching, taking the yellowed leaves without sentiment. When he finished, she was quiet for the length of 3 fireflies. "That's why you look at me like goodbye and hello," she said. "You're not a stranger who likes me. You're someone who loses me on a schedule." His throat closed. He said something like that. She turned the idea over and asked what the treatment could give her, the road behind her, and then, watching his face, asked, "Or?" He made himself say the true part, because she would smell a managed answer, or nothing changed, or it cost her. Headaches, worse sometimes, things they could not promise to undo. The doctor did not love it. She would not pretend it was safe, and neither would he. But he was asking anyway, she observed. He was asking anyway, he agreed, and looked at his hands, and told her why. Because there was a man who wanted to decide her life in a folder, and because last night she had found a door in the dark, and because he would rather chase a hard chance with her than keep a safe nothing without her. That was not fair of him, he said. She should hear how unfair it was. Mara was quiet. Then she laughed, low, wondering. What was unfair, she said, was that he had told her the risks, that a dishonest man would have had her signature by now and her thanks on top of it. She pressed her thumb, once, to his ring, and this time she watched herself do it, delighted and unnerved, and said that her hands knew him even when she did not. Then she lifted her chin and told him to book his dangerous door. If she had been losing the road every night for however long, she would rather go looking for it than sit still and be tidy about it. And sitting still and tidy had never been her best event. He told her he had to hear her say it on a clear morning too, not just now, that the doctor needed the same mind that heard it to still have it by dark, that it was the whole trick of the thing. Then they would make a clear morning, she said, as though the world were a stubborn hydrangea that only needed the right person to stop crowding it, and she asked whether he would be there. Every one, he told her. Then it was less frightening than it should be, she said, and leaned her head on his shoulder, and for a little while the folder and the 30th and the 9 days were only weather somewhere past the ridge. They did not stay past the ridge. Julian went to the company the next morning, because you did not let Roland set the ground, and because a petition you met on the terrace over lemonade was a petition you had already half lost. The Hale building downtown threw its glass 40 stories into the summer haze, and the lobby breathed that particular chill of money and marble and cut flowers, changed daily, whether anyone looked at them. He rode up alone. The boardroom smelled of furniture polish and the faint ghost of Roland's cologne, which arrived, as it always had, a moment before the man. Roland was already at the head of the table, of course, linen the color of bone, a carafe of ice water beading in front of him, and a second chair drawn close on his right, occupied. He introduced the woman as though Julian would not know her. Vivian Ashcroft, of Meridian, the deal Julian had let collapse in May. Julian did know her, silver blonde, precise, a woman who ran an acquisitions arm the size of a small nation, and who had once, in gentler years, been seated next to him at 100 dinners by people who thought a match of houses was the same as a match. She inclined her head and told him he looked tired. Vivian was here as a friend of the family, Roland said, and as a demonstration, Meridian was prepared to re-enter, a larger stake, a stabilizing stake, on the condition that the house showed the market it had a functioning hand on the wheel. A chairman who was present. A structure that was not hostage to a private tragedy. He was not the villain of Julian's evening garden, he said. He was the only person in this building still trying to save the thing Julian's father had built. And he had found a way that saved Julian's wife's dignity in the bargain. Fernbrook, Meridian's capital. Julian's name still over the door. All it cost was that he stopped pretending the woman in that greenhouse could sign a contract. She can sign a contract. On what day? Roland asked, so reasonably it was obscene. Name the day, and I'll have a notary there by noon. Julian said that Thursday she would be examined by her physician for enrollment in a clinical trial, and watched it land, watched Vivian's precise face sharpen and Roland's go, for one instant, genuinely surprised. Before the surprise was folded away. A recognized protocol, Julian said, consent witnessed and renewed. If a court was going to decide his wife lacked capacity, it could decide it against a signed medical consent obtained under a doctor's supervision. He invited Roland to try that in front of a judge, to try telling a courtroom he had moved to seize a woman's affairs, the same week her own physician documented her competent to direct her own care. The room held very still. Vivian set down her water. Roland repeated the word. A trial. Experimental. With risks, no doubt, and recovered his footing the way water finds level, saying that this, then, was the arrangement Julian offered the board on the 30th. Not stability, but a gamble. A nephew wagering the company's majority holder on an unproven procedure because he could not bear a quiet grief. He turned to Vivian with the weariness of a man displaying a wound and said, "You see what I've been managing." "I see," Vivian said, "that he came here himself, which is more than the man you described would do." She rose, gathered her folio, and paused by Julian on her way out, close, her voice pitched under the polish. Roland had not only filed for guardianship, she told him. He had had someone approach Fernbrook to hold a room, and had had someone approach Mara's mother. Her eyes were not unkind. Whatever his Thursday was, she said, he should bring more than hope to it. Roland had brought her here to look as if she had already chosen, and she had not, but he would find someone who had. And she was gone, heels precise on the marble, leaving the two Hales alone with the beading carafe and 40 years of the same argument. Her mother, Julian said. You went to Ellen. He had informed a mother, Roland answered, that her only child was being kept as a private experiment by a husband who would not let the world help her. She had been grateful. She had wept. Julian might find, on the 30th, that he was the only person in the room who thought his garden was love and not captivity. At the door, Roland did what he had done on the terrace. The parting shot delivered without heat. 8 days. His regards to Thursday. Julian drove home too fast on roads that had learned to make him careful, and found the house wrong the moment he came in. Winnie at the foot of the stairs, with her hands folded and her fence post-spine. The particular stillness of a woman guarding a door. Mara was in his study, she told him, and had been for 20 minutes. She had wandered, as she did on the soft afternoons, following the cool rooms, and had already been inside when Winnie found her, and Winnie had judged it worse to make it a secret than to let her sit. Her dryness had gone somewhere. What was under it looked almost like fear on his behalf. Mara had found the book, she said, the ledger. It was open. She had been reading his days. He went up the stairs with his heart in his mouth. Mara sat in his chair, in the north light, the leather ledger open across her knees, and she did not look up when he came in. The room smelled of cedar and beeswax and the warm dust of afternoon, and her hands on the pages were the hands that tied bows on tomato steaks, and her face, when she finally lifted it, was a country he had no map for. July the 14th, she said quietly. Do not mention the sea. She turned a leaf. July the 9th. She likes the white roses better than the red. July the 19th. She asked about her mother, and I told her the truth and lost the whole afternoon. Her voice was very level, the way his had been on the terrace with Roland, which is the most dangerous level a voice has. There were 11 months of her in here, she said, every day, what frightened her, what opened a door and what slammed one, which sentences to use and which to withhold. She closed the book on her finger, keeping the place, and looked at him. You've been studying me. He said her name. She said the rest for him, managing her. There was a plan at the top of every page, she said. A plan for handling the woman who would not remember she had been handled. She stood, and the ledger hung from her hand like a verdict. He had known about the treatment before he asked her on the wall. He had known the doctor's name before she frightened herself learning it. He had known how she took her coffee and where she kept her fear, and he had sat in this cool room every morning and written the day's strategy, and then gone out and been gentle at her, on schedule. And she had fallen for it. It said so. It was in the book. She fell again by dusk, like she was a lock, and he had the combination written down. It was not a strategy, he told her, and his voice would not hold. It was a raft. He wrote it because if he did not, the whole day of her went, and there was nothing to give her back the next morning, nothing to build on. He would be starting from a black wall every single dawn, with a stranger who fired him. Then she was a project, she said, her eyes bright and terrible. The greenhouse the mystery woman was going to open one day, the one he had gone all soft about at lunch. She had read that too, she said. He had written that she must never know it existed. That was her. Was it not? There was no lady of the hotel. She was the lady of the hotel. And he had been running her like a company he could not afford to lose. The truth of half of it and the wrongness of the rest closed his throat entirely. Downstairs, faintly, the phone had begun to ring. Winnie's tread going to answer it, the summer light lying gold and indifferent across the desk, where his whole ledgered defense of her lay exposed as its opposite. He reached for the book. Mara stepped back, holding it against her chest the way she had held the sheet that morning, the way she held everything she was afraid to lose or afraid to be, and told him not to, that she wanted to keep the one thing in this house that told her the truth about the man who kept her. And then Winnie was in the doorway, grey-faced, the cordless phone held out at arm's length like something too hot to keep. It was Dr. Rao's office, she said. They had had a call from the board's council. Someone had told them about Thursday. Someone had asked the ethics committee to review whether Mara could consent at all. They had moved the enrollment window. If Julian wanted the trial, they needed her on a clear morning by Friday, or the door closed for a year. And they needed to know, tonight, that she still wanted it. Winnie looked at Mara holding the ledger to her heart like an accusation, and said, very gently, that she did not think she did. Julian took the phone from Winnie's hand. It was warm from the kitchen and slick against his palm, and the voice on the other end was not Rao, but her night coordinator, brisk and kind and reading from a form. She was sorry to call so late, she said. The committee had asked them to close the window Friday. They needed his wife present and clear by 9, and needed to hear from her tonight that she intended to proceed. Just her intention. Was she able to come to the phone? Across the study, Mara stood in the north light, with the ledger clamped to her chest, already shaking her head. Small and fast. A woman refusing a door she had been told was a door. Julian said she was here, and asked for a moment. He covered the mouthpiece. He did not cross the room. He had trained his feet out of crossing rooms toward her, and never had the training cost him what it cost him now. 6 feet of cedar-smelling air, and a desk between them, and everything. He told her they only needed to know if she would come Friday. Not a signature, just whether she would let them look. So you can win your court date. Her voice was very quiet. The afternoon had gone long and gold through the window, and lay across the leather in her arms, across her knuckles, across the days of her he had written down. It was in the book, she said, consent witnessed and renewed. He needed a clear morning of her the way a bank needed a signature. She had read the plan. She was not a woman to him in that book. She was a problem with the deadline. That was not. He stopped. He would not lie to her. She smelled a managed answer the way she smelled a thirsty plant. The deadline was real, he said. The book was real, and so was the part she was not reading out loud, the part where he wrote down that she laughed, that she tied bows on the stakes, that she liked her coffee like dessert. Those were not strategy. A man managing a problem did not write down that she had hung the evening star. Into the phone he said, "Can you hold?" and set it face down on the desk without waiting. She did not know what was true in there, she said, looking at the book and then at him, and the brightness in her eyes was the worst thing in the room. That was the trap of it. Even the tender parts, she could not tell if he had meant them or logged them. He had built a whole language for her, and she had woken into the middle of it with no way to check a single word. Then she should not check it against him, he told her, his throat aching. She should check it against Friday. If the door was real, she would get the road back. Her own road. She would not need his book, because she would have her own days again. And she could throw this one in the pool for all he cared. But the window closed, whether she trusted him or not. She was quiet. Somewhere below the morning dove had given up for the evening, and the cicadas had taken the shift, sawing in the heat that would not break until dark. She turned the ledger a quarter turn in her hands, the way she had turned his ring, unthinking, and caught herself doing it, and her face crumpled and set. "Tell them I'll think about it," she said. "That's the truest thing I have." She told him to tell them the woman who had woken up 2 hours ago in a stranger's house would think about handing that same stranger her brain to experiment on and see how they liked it in a form. Julian lifted the phone and said she needed until tomorrow, that she was considering, and that he would call by noon. The coordinator hesitated, then said noon Friday was the wall. After that she could not help him, and, gently, which somehow made the wall taller, that she hoped Mara said yes, because Dr. Rao did not lose sleep over many of them, and was losing it over this one. The line went quiet in his ear. When he looked up, Mara had set the ledger on the desk. Not handed it, set it. The way you put down something you have decided is evidence. And walked out past him into the cool of the hall, barefoot, still in his shirt. A wife who did not know she was one, going to find a part of the house that had not been written about yet. He let her go. He was very, very good at letting her go. She was gone from the greenhouse the next morning, and gone from the terrace, and Winnie found her at last, in the kitchen, at the great scarred table. Wrapped in the cardigan Julian had draped on her the night before last, drinking the coffee she had asked for, without knowing why she knew to ask. 2 sugars, too much milk. Mara eyed her over the rim, and accused her, suspicious, of having made it right. Winnie set a plate of toast down with the flat authority of a woman who had fed grief before, and knew it took bread. Mara had made it that way for 11 years before Winnie ever met her, she said. She told her to eat, that she had the look of someone who had decided to be difficult on an empty stomach, and that difficult was a full stomach activity. Ask anyone downstairs. They did it professionally. A reluctant something tugged at the corner of Mara's mouth. She said Winnie was not afraid of her. Winnie was 61 and had buried 2 husbands' worth of opinions about how a house should run, she answered. A pretty woman in a cardigan did not frighten her. She poured herself a half cup, uninvited, and sat, which she did for no one, and told Mara that he had not slept, in case the book had left that page out. He had sat in that cold study with her days open on his knees, and had not written a word. The first time in 11 months, he had nothing to write. Mara had done that. She could make of it what she. The doorbell rang through the great house. 2 long notes, formal, and Winnie's face changed. She rose too fast for 61 and told Mara to stay, and it was not dry now. Whoever it was, she would go. But Mara was already up, because she had never in either of her lives waited in a kitchen to be told who was at a door, and she came out into the marble hall behind Winnie as the housemaid opened it onto the white summer glare, and stopped, one hand going to the wall. The woman on the step was perhaps 60, soft-featured, in a travel-creased blouse the colour of weak tea, clutching a handbag with both hands the way you hold a rail on a boat. Her hair had gone the silver of Mara's someday. Her eyes found Mara across the hall and filled instantly, helplessly, and she said one word like it had been held under her tongue for 11 months. Sweetheart. And Mara, who had not known Julian's face, who woke every dawn to a black wall behind her, said, without hesitation, without effort, in a voice gone suddenly warm and unguarded, "Mum?" Julian, coming down the stair at the sound, stopped halfway and gripped the rail. There it was, the cruelty he had never gotten used to. The wall took only the years since she had met him. Everything from before Julian stood untouched on the far side of it, and her mother, whom she had known a whole lifetime, stood squarely in the untouched country, and Mara crossed the hall and went into Ellen's arms like a woman coming out of deep water, and knew her, and held on. Ellen rocked her, murmuring that she had her, that she was not going anywhere. Over Mara's shoulder her wet eyes found Julian on the stair, and in them was no cruelty at all, which was worse, only a mother's certainty, freshly poured by a man in bone-coloured linen, that she had come to rescue her child from a beautiful cage. They sat in the morning room because Ellen asked for tea, and Winnie made it strong and left the door open on her way out, which was Winnie's version of standing guard. The room smelled of the beeswax and the roses Julian cut fresh, whether Mara would remember them or not, white ones, in a bowl on the sill, and the light came in warm and made liars of them all. Ellen told him his uncle had telephoned her 2 days ago and told her things she should have been told last autumn, that her daughter could not hold a day, that she woke frightened in a house the size of a hotel to a husband she did not know, that there was a place up the coast with real nurses and real doctors, and that Julian had refused it and kept her out here among the flowers and called it love. Her hands were steady on the cup. She had cried herself past trembling somewhere on the drive. She would like him to tell her, she said, why she should not take her daughter home this afternoon and let people who were trained help her. Because she would wake tomorrow in Ellen's spare room, Julian said, and it would be a stranger's spare room, and the day after it would be a stranger's spare room again, and Ellen would watch her be afraid every single dawn for the rest of. And was she not afraid here? Ellen asked, her voice not rising because it did not have to. She had fired him this morning, the housekeeper said. Fired her own husband, and did not know his name. That was the life he was defending. She was afraid for 1 hour here, Julian said. 1 hour, at waking. And then she came back. By evening she was herself, and not afraid. Because her body had learned this place even when her mind could not. That was the thread. That was the only mercy he had found in 11 months, and it lived in these rooms, in that greenhouse, in this exact light. Take her 90 miles away, and the mercy went with it. She would have to build the safety again from nothing, every night, and never finish. Ellen was quiet. Mara, between them, sat with her mother's hand in one of hers and watched Julian over the roses with an expression he could not read, the ledger hurt and the wall fear, and something older and steadier underneath. He did talk beautifully, Ellen said at last to Mara, not unkindly. He always had, and it was why she had never trusted the wedding. Then she turned back to Julian and said Roland spoke of an experiment, something unproven, that Julian meant to wager her daughter on before a court could stop him, and asked if it was true. There was a trial, Julian said, a recognized one. It could give her the days back. Or? Ellen asked, the same question Mara had asked on the wall. He gave Ellen the same answer, because he would not build two truths and get caught between them. Or it cost her headaches, worse, things they could not promise to undo, and her doctor would not pretend it was safe. Ellen set down her cup with a small final click. He would let strangers put an unproven thing in her daughter's head, she said, sooner than let strangers keep her safe in a good, clean facility. Did he hear himself? He called Fernbrook a cage, and then would gamble the one thing she had left, a body that had healed, on a maybe. Her eyes filled again, but her voice went hard, as a mother's can. No, she did not think so. She thought he was a lonely man who could not bear to be a widower of the mind, and thought he would risk her rather than lose her, and that was not love, whatever his garden looked like at sunset. That was need. The word landed exactly where Roland's had, twice now, from two mouths, and Julian had no defense against it, because, a part of him. The part that had said say yes to the trial before Roland can stop us, had been afraid of that word since the night on the wall. "Mom," Mara's voice, small but her own. "Stop, please, he hasn't." She pressed the heel of her hand to her temple. The old gesture, the walls shifting somewhere behind her eyes. She could not hold all of this, she said. She had woken this morning hating him, and now her mother was here, and real, the realest thing in this whole house, and both of them were pulling, and she had no road. She had no. She stood abruptly, swaying, and Julian did not reach, and Ellen did, and Mara let her mother catch her elbow, and that small choosing of hands went through Julian like cold water. She needed air, she said. She needed the green. Neither of them was to follow her. She went, barefoot, out through the terrace doors into the hardening light, toward the glass house that was the one thing in her life she had built with her own hands, even if she would forget she built it. The two of them, mother and husband, sat in the ruined tea quiet and did not look at each other. She would take her Friday, Ellen said finally, gently, gathering her handbag. She had booked a room at the inn in the village and would not sleep under his roof, but Friday she would come and take her daughter home. And thank God his uncle had called her before he had talked a court into letting him open her head. He could fight her on it, she said. Roland spoke of a hearing on the 30th, and Julian would fight everyone. But he should ask himself, when he was writing in his little book tonight, whose comfort the garden was really for. She let herself out. The hired car idled on the gravel where Roland's had, and took her down the drive, unhurried. And Julian sat alone with the white roses, and understood that his uncle had not brought a folder this time. He had brought the one person in the world Mara would follow through any door without being managed into it. Roland had not come to seize her. He had come to make her want to leave. Julian found her in the greenhouse in the killing heat of noon, and the door Ellen had opened had let the whole storm in behind it. Mara was not gardening. She stood at the potting bench with her hands flat on the wood and her back to him, and the air under the glass was thick and green and hard to breathe, sweat already gathering at her hairline, the tomatoes she had tied in bows drooping in the heat around her. She had remembered something, she said, without turning, her voice strange. Just now, out here, not from the book, because the book was his handwriting, and she could not trust it. From her. She turned, and her face was wet and furious, and lit from within. "The sea," she said. His 14th of July, do not mention the sea. She remembered why. Julian went very still and said her name. They had fought about it, she said, the words coming fast now, the wall not blank, but bleeding, one road forcing itself up through the black. Before, whenever before was. She had wanted to drive up to the coast, and he had not, and she had said something cruel. And he had gone quiet the way he went quiet. And then, she pressed both hands to her temples, and then there was a road, and it was raining. First rain in weeks, and the sky was the wrong color, green, and she was angry. Still angry. Looking at him and not her breath tore. She had been driving, had she not? That was why he did not mention the sea. Because she had wanted to go and she had been angry and she had been driving, and she had done this. To herself. To them. No. He crossed the room now. Now, at last, he crossed it, the training gone to ash, and took her by the shoulders. It was rain and a guardrail and a road that had no business being that slick, he told her. It was an accident. Did she hear the word? An accident. There was no cruelty in it, there was weather, and he had spent 11 months making sure she never had to wake up carrying that, and he would spend 11 more. That's the managing. She was shaking under his hands. That was exactly it, she said. The terrible gentle thing. He had decided she could not hold the blame, so he had written "Don't mention the sea" and kept it from her, every day, on schedule, and it had not been his blame to keep. It had been hers. He had been protecting her from her own life, and calling it a raft. She stepped back out of his hands, and the loss of her weight was a physical thing. How was she supposed to say yes to a treatment that gave it all back? That road, that rain, that green sky, when the man asking her had spent a year deciding which parts of her own self she was allowed to survive. Because the alternative was Fernbrook and a stranger's spare room forever, he said, and heard how it sounded, heard the need in it, Ellen's word, Roland's word, and could not stop. Because he could not say it, she said, her eyes blazing. Say the true end of that sentence. He could not what? I can't lose you twice. It came out of him raw, the guard down, the exact declaration the ledger had taught him to ration. Once to the storm, and every morning again. He could not do it. He was not strong enough. Roland was right, and her mother was right. Some of this garden was for him. Some of it was because he could not bear a house where she was gone and breathing at the same time. There, that was the ugliest thing in the book, and he had never written it down because he could not stand to read it in his own hand. The cicadas roared outside. Inside, the heat pressed down through the glass, and the smell of tomato leaves and wet earth, and her, close, was the smell of every evening he had been greedy for, and it was collapsing. Thank you, Mara said. Quiet now. Terribly quiet, the way he had been with Roland, the most dangerous level a voice has. For finally telling her one thing without a plan under it. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist, soil and tears, and stood up straight, and for a moment she was so wholly the woman he had married that his heart went into his throat. She was going to her mother's Friday, she said. He was not to fight it, not to be gentle at her, not to write a page tonight about the sentences that might change her mind. She had read them. They did not work anymore. That was the one gift the book had given her. If she did this door of his, this trial, and she did not know that she would do it as a woman who chose it clear-eyed from her own mother's kitchen. Not one who fell for him again by dusk, because he had draped a cardigan on her at the right minute. If it was real, it would survive her leaving. Everything real did. She walked past him, out of the glass and the green, across the hot stone in her bare feet, back toward the great cool house, and this time she did not go to fall in love with him by evening. This time, she went to pack. Julian stood in the ruined heat of the greenhouse, and did not follow. And for once it was not discipline. It was that he had no page for this. 11 months of days, and he had never written the one where she remembered the road, and remembered leaving, and did both in the same clear hour, the exact clear hour Dr. Rao needed, spent not on consent, but on going. He walked back through the house at dusk, and did not turn on the lamps. The pool lay flat and dark, and swallowed the last of the sky. Winnie had left a plate under a cloth in the kitchen that he did not touch. He went up to the study and sat where he had sat every morning for 11 months, and opened the ledger to the day, the summer Tuesday, and picked up the pen, and found he could not make it move. The phone lit the desk, not Rao. Roland, whose name he had learned to dread, and who never called at this hour unless he had already won something. He had heard Ellen came, his uncle said, comfortable, unhurried, a good woman, terribly relieved. She had told the village innkeeper her daughter was coming home Friday, and villagers talked. It made a rather clean picture for the 30th. A mother reclaiming her child, a husband who would not let go. He should withdraw his little trial, Roland said. Sign the arrangement. Let the girl go somewhere she was safe, and let this house get back to the business of surviving him. There was still a version of the 30th where he kept his name over the door. Julian looked at the blank page, and the ring on his hand, and out the dark window toward the greenhouse he could no longer see, and said, mostly to himself, that the window closed Friday noon. Yes, Roland said, pleased, mistaking it for surrender. It did. Everything closed eventually, and the wise man simply chose which door. Julian set the phone down without answering and pressed his thumb, hard, to the wedding ring, in the place she had found in the dark without a memory to guide her, and thought she remembered the road and the leaving on the same clear morning. Whole, herself, For an hour or an afternoon the wall had come down entirely, and it had come down on the far side from him. Down the hall a door opened and closed. A suitcase, he knew, though he could not hear it, the small, precise sounds of a woman folding a life she could not remember owning into a bag, to carry to a house where at least the mornings would not frighten her, because at least she would know the face across the table. He had until Friday noon. 2 days. 1 clear hour of her, if it came at all, and it would have to come in a village inn 90 miles from the only garden that had ever learnt her hands, with her mother's certainty on one side and Roland's court on the other, and nothing of Julian's in the room at all. He looked down at the ledger, at the clean page waiting, and for the first time since the storm he understood that the book could not save her, had never saved her, had only let him survive the losing. He closed it, and in the dark study, with 2 days left, and his wife packing to leave, and the door in her mind swinging on its own now, opening onto roads he had spent a year keeping shut, Julian Hale reached for the phone again and dialed the one number he had left, not Rao, not Roland, and waited, in the summer dark, for Ellen to pick up. Ellen answered on the 4th ring, her voice coming down the line already braced, the way you answer a number you have decided to distrust. It was late, she told him. She had said what she meant to do. He knew, he said, and would be quick. He watched the pool below the window hold the last blue of the sky in its flat black eye, and made his voice as plain as he could make it. She should take her Friday. He would not be in the drive. He would not send a lawyer, would not send Winnie to slow her at the door. Whatever car she had hired, let it come. Silence on the line, the kind with weight in it. He heard the little sounds of a village inn behind her, a screen door, a moth against a bulb, the far small clink of a kitchen closing for the night. That was not the man who had talked at her over the roses this morning, Ellen said at last. What was the trick? No trick, he told her. He was too tired for tricks, and they had never worked on her anyway. She had said one thing today he could not put down. She had asked whose comfort the garden was for. He had been asking it since she drove off, and the honest answer was that some of it was his. She had been right. He had built a soft green wall around Mara, and told himself it was all for her. And some of it was so he would not have to stand in a house where she was gone, and breathing at the same time. Then Ellen understood why he asked her to let him finish. Please, his throat worked. She had to take her, he said, because Mara had to go somewhere he was not, or she would never know what she wanted free of him. She had read his book today, 11 months of him deciding which sentences opened her and which ones closed her, and she would never trust a warm thing that happened in these rooms again. And she was right not to, because he had spoiled the well being careful. So take her. But when she decided about the trial, and it was hers, only hers, he needed Ellen to promise she would not steer her toward Fernbrook the way he had steered her toward the garden. No hands. Not Ellen's, not his. They both put them down and let her choose the door. He could hear Ellen breathing, and under it the crack in the certainty a mother paws and repaws all day and cannot always hold at midnight. He would let her pick the dangerous one, Ellen said, the experiment. He would stand there and let her. He would stand there and let her pick Fernbrook, he answered, if that was the clear-eyed thing she wanted. And the words cost him something visible, even alone in the dark. That was the whole of what he had learned. He did not get to keep her by holding the pen. If she was real, and she was the realest thing either of them had ever loved, then whatever she chose free would survive her leaving. And if it did not survive it, then it had been his to begin with, and he had no right to it. A long pause, and then Ellen's voice came back changed, wet at the edges and stripped of its armor. He always did talk beautifully, she said. It was why she had never trusted the wedding. A breath. All right. No hands. God help them both, and she hung up gently, the way Winnie set down a tray, and left him with the moth and kitchen silence gone, and only the summer night breathing jasmine through the sash. He did not write in the ledger. He closed it, and set it in the middle of the desk where Mara had set it, evidence facing evidence, and went to do the harder thing before he could talk himself out of it. The Hale building at 8 the next morning was already shimmering, the downtown haze thick as breath, the revolving door exhaling refrigerated air and the smell of cut lilies onto the hot pavement. Julian rode up alone with a folder of his own under his arm, and this one had no tabs, only his signature waiting in 3 places on the last page. Roland was in the boardroom before him, of course, at the head of the long table with the carafe already beading, his linen the color of bone, one lawyer beside him and the petition squared on the wood like a place setting. He did not rise. Ellen told him Julian had grown reasonable overnight, he said. He would believe it when he saw ink. You'll see ink. Julian set his folder down and slid it the length of the table, the way Roland had slid his over the lunch. It stopped clean under the old man's hands. Open it. Roland opened it. Julian watched the exact moment the words stopped meaning what he expected, the silver brows drawing down, the reading slowing, the second read beginning. The lawyer leaned in and went still. This was a transfer, Roland said. That was a transfer, Julian answered. His majority, his chairmanship, the name over the door, all of it to the board, effective the moment Roland countersigned. He had wanted the house his brother built for 30 years. Take it. It was his before lunch. Julian pulled out a chair, at last, and sat, unhurried, in a seat that had never once needed to hurry, and told him the part he would want to read twice. The guardianship rested on one leg, that the company could not survive a majority holder who could not hold a day. He had just fixed the company. There were no shares to stabilize, no proxy in limbo, no tragedy holding the quarter hostage. Mara Hale owned nothing this board needed. She was a private citizen with a garden. Roland had no cause left to touch a thing about her, and no judge on the coast would let him try once this was filed. The drone of the tower's air handling was the only sound. Roland's thumb moved once across the page, a small betraying thing, and he stopped it. He would hand him everything, Roland said slowly, to keep him from a woman who would not know his name at breakfast. He would hand him a building, Julian said, to keep him from putting her in one. His voice stayed level, which was worse than shouting. The lawyer glanced between them like a man at a net. Roland had told him sentiment was not a strategy. He had been right. So Julian had stopped playing strategy. He had nothing left for Roland to threaten. Take the company, he said. He found he did not want the thing that had made her a line item. For a moment, one moment, and he would have missed it if he had not spent a childhood learning to read this exact face. Something crossed his uncle's features that was not triumph. The old man looked down at the transfer, at the name that had been his brother's and was about to be his, and his jaw did a small complicated thing, and his hand, when it reached the pen, was not quite steady. He understood there was no undoing this, Roland said, rougher than he meant it. No court would hand it back. Julian would be a man who owned a house and a greenhouse, and nothing else his father would recognize. His father would recognize the greenhouse, Julian said. Sign it, or do not. Either way, he was done at this table. Roland did not sign it. He set the pen down, very precisely, on the closed folder, and looked at his nephew as though seeing something he had filed away years ago and lost the drawer for. Frankly, he began, and stopped, the old opener failing him for the first time Julian could remember. He tried again. Frankly, I had a brother once who'd have done exactly this, and I spent 40 years telling myself he was a fool for it. He rose, buttoning his linen out of habit, and told the lawyer to withdraw the petition, this morning, all of it, and to release the room at Fernbrook. There was nothing on the table to gather, and he gathered nothing. At the door he paused, the parting shot loaded and, for once, spent unfired. He would not countersign the transfer either, he said. Julian should keep his father's name over his father's door. God knew one of them should have wanted the garden more than the building. And he went, unhurried, down the glass hall, an old man walking away from the only thing he had asked for, leaving it because he had finally seen what it cost to hold. Julian sat alone in the cold, bright room with the carafe beating and the lilies breathing their sweetness, and understood that he had come to give everything away and had been handed, instead, the one thing he had stopped hoping for: a clear road, and no one on it with a folder. He drove home under a sky gone white with heat, and did not speed, because the roads had taught him. Winnie met him in the marble hall, with the stillness of a woman who has guarded a door all morning and is tired of it. Mara was packed, she said. 2 bags. She had made the bed herself and made it wrong, hospital corners, which Winnie was choosing to find hopeful. Her dryness cracked down the middle. Mara had asked her whether Julian was a kind man or only a careful one, she said, and she had told her she had worked for both, and only one of them had sat up all night with a book of her days. Then she had told Mara to fold her own jumpers, because she would dust around a folder, but she would not pack for a leaving she did not approve of. He asked where she was. The greenhouse, Winnie said. Where else? 30 rooms, and she said goodbye to the tomatoes. Then, lo, the rye gone out of it entirely. Whatever he meant to say to her, he should say it without the plan. It was the one dialect she would trust now. He found her among the staked rows in the killing green heat, and she was not tidying this time. She stood with her hand flat on the potting bench, the twine spool beside her, the 2 bags waiting by the glass door with the sun striking off their zippers. Sweat stood at her hairline. The air was thick with wet earth and tomato leaf and the drowsy engine of the bees in the lavender, and she turned when his shadow crossed the light, and did not fire him, and did not smile. She had remembered he would come, she said, not from the book, from this morning. She had woken at 6, and had not known the room, and had been frightened, and then she pressed 2 fingers to her temple, the old gesture, but her eyes stayed on him. Then she had found a thread in the dark, and pulled it, and it had not been a face, it had been a feeling, that someone careful would be sitting in a chair not reaching for her. And she had lain there furious that she knew it, and glad that she knew it, both, and could not tell which was stronger. The book said he kept her by managing the mornings, she said, so he could tell her why her own head had handed him back before he had opened the door. Because some of it was already crossing the dark on its own, he said. That was not his doing. That was hers. He stopped by the bench, and did not touch her, and did not close the 6 feet. He had come to tell her 3 things, and none of them had a plan under them. He would say them plain, and then drive her to her mother himself if she would let him. She folded her arms and told him to say them. First, I gave the company away this morning, tried to. Roland wouldn't take it, which is a longer story. But I went in ready to hand him my father's name and everything under it, because the only reason a court could touch you was that you were tangled in it, and I wanted you untangled more than I wanted any of it. The petition's withdrawn. Fernbrook's released. Nobody's coming for you, whatever you choose. You're free, Mara. There's no deadline holding you, but the one your own body's fighting. Her arms loosened a fraction. She said he had given away a company. He had tried to, he said. It turned out he was bad at losing things on purpose. A year of practice, and he still could not do it clean. His voice roughened. Second thing, he was sorry. Not the careful sorry, not the kind he would log. The real one, with a cost he could not take back. He had just proved he would set fire to everything he owned to say it, so she should believe this one. He reached into the trug on the bench, where he had left them on his way in, and lifted out the roses. Red ones. 12, thorns still on, cut clumsily by his own hand from the far wall because Winnie's shears had been the only ones to hand. Red, he said. She had told him 3 years ago that red roses were for apologies. He had given her white every day for 11 months because he had not earned the red. He had earned it now. He had managed her. He had decided which parts of her own life she was strong enough to survive, and that was arrogance dressed as love, and she had been right to read it as a cage even when the flowers were real. Mara looked at the red roses in his scarred hands, and something moved across her face, quick and deep as a fish under ice. She did not take them. But she did not step back either, and the third thing, she said. The third thing was the hardest, so he would do it fast. He set the roses on the bench between them, a red line in all the green. Friday was hers, he said. Only hers. Go to her mother tonight, wake in her care Friday, and if she decided the trial was a door she wanted to walk, Rao would be at the hospital at 9, and he would drive her if she asked, and sit in the hall if she would rather. And if she decided it was too much, and would sooner keep her black wall than let strangers chase the road, he would drive her home from that too, and would never write another page to change her mind. He was putting the pen down, for good. Whatever she kept of him, she would keep, because she chose it clear-eyed, on a road he was not standing in, not because he had draped a cardigan at the right minute. The greenhouse ticked with heat. A drop fell from the hose fitting, and struck the flagstone with a small, flat sound. She looked at him a long moment, then at the tomatoes she had tied in bows, and she reached out and, without thinking, without deciding, pressed her thumb once to the ring on his left hand, turning it a 1/4 inch, and caught herself doing it. And this time she did not look unnerved. She looked like a woman reading her own handwriting on a page she had forgotten writing. My hands keep choosing you, she said quietly, even when I've decided not to. She picked up the red roses, held them against the borrowed shirt, thorns and all. She would go to her mother, she said, and she would think about his door, with nobody's hands on her, but her own. That was all she could promise a man she had met this morning. A breath, and the ghost of the old spark, wet-eyed. But he could drive her. Sitting still and tidy in the back of a hired car was never going to be her best event. He drove her the 90 miles, with the windows down and the warm green summer roaring past. And neither of them mentioned the sea, not because he was managing it, but because she reached over near the county line and turned the radio up on a song she did not know she knew all the words to, and sang them, and he let her, and that was the whole of the conversation that mattered. He left her at the inn with her mother in the doorway, and the geraniums blazing in the window boxes, and the smell of somebody's charcoal supper drifting up the lane. And he did not linger, and he looked back in the mirror only twice, which for him was a discipline close to sainthood. Then he drove home to the too big house, and did not turn on the lamps, and sat by the pool that nobody swam in until the fireflies came up out of the lawn, writing and erasing themselves over the dark grass, and waited for a Friday he had no way to steer. Friday came white and early. He was at the hospital by 8:30, in the corridor Rao had told him to wait in, a corridor that smelled of floor wax and cut carnations, and the particular chill of a building that never opened a window, and he sat in a plastic chair with his hands loose between his knees and did not pace, because pacing was a way of reaching. Doctor, Rao found him there at 10 to 9, brisk, reading glasses pushed up into grey-threaded hair. Mara was here, she said. Ellen had brought her at 8. She was clear, clearer than Rao had seen her, and Rao had read a year of his book, so she knew what clear cost her. She sat down beside him, which she never did. Mara had woken at the inn not knowing the room, she said, but had told her mother she knew something waited that she had chosen, and would not leave until she had chased it. Ellen had not steered her. She had said she promised someone she would not. That was me, Julian said. His mouth was dry. He asked whether she wanted to see him before she signed anything. Rao said that was her condition, not Rao's. Then she stood and gave him one more thing before she brought him in. The door he kept calling a crack, she had looked at this morning's imaging. It was not a crack anymore. Something was rerouting in there. Slow, real. The kind of thing the trial was built to widen if they had caught it in time. She could not promise him the road back whole. Nobody honest could. But Mara had carried this morning across the dark on her own. No book, no cardigan, no him in the chair. That was the first day of the rest of her that she had kept by herself. She almost smiled. He had given a company away yesterday, she had heard. He could have saved himself the trouble. Her own head had already been choosing to remember him. They brought him in, and Mara was sitting on the edge of the bed in the plain gown, with a cardigan of her mother's over it, and her bare feet swinging an inch above the cold tile. The red roses standing in a plastic jug on the sill where somebody had found them water. She looked up when the door opened, and he braced for the customs officer, the black wall, the fired stranger. "There you are," she said, "the staring man." And then, watching his face come apart very quietly, "I know your name, Julian. I've known it since I woke. I didn't have to pull the thread this time. It was just there, same as my mother's face, on the near side of the wall for the first time." Her chin trembled and steadied. She did not have all of it, she said. Not the wedding, not 3 years, only fragments and a book she still half resented. But she had this morning, and she meant to keep it, and she would like to keep the ones after it too. She held out her hand, palm up, the way you offer a hand across water. So she was going to let them chase the door, she said, clear-eyed, from her own mother's care, exactly like he had said. Not because he had draped a cardigan, because she had looked at a black wall her whole waking life and decided she would rather go looking for the road than sit still and be tidy about it. A wet, wondering laugh, he could hold the basket if he wanted. He was good at holding the basket. He crossed the room, no discipline left anywhere in him, and took her offered hand and pressed his thumb to her knuckles and could not speak. And she let him not speak, which was its own kind of knowing. He would hold the basket, he managed. Every one. She signed the consent with Rao's pen and Ellen as her witness, in her own bad handwriting, the same hand that tied bows on tomato steaks, and nobody in that room had steered the hand that did it. When it was done, she looked at the red roses, and then at him, and said that red was for apologies. She had read that in a book once. She almost got the whole sentence out before her mouth wobbled, and Ellen turned to the window to give them the moment, and the summer light came through the wired glass and lay across the three of them like something poured. The trial was not a miracle, because there are none, only mornings. But the mornings changed. They came back slowly, the way a tide comes over sand, and Julian learned patience in a new dialect. Not the patience of a man managing a loss, but of a man watching a road rebuild itself a stone at a time. Some dawns she still woke to a stranger in the chair and fired him, and he still said all right and went to the door, but now, more often than not, she called him back before his hand found the knob. She would test his name, appalled and delighted, and ask why she knew that. And by the second week of the new medicine there were mornings, real ones. When she opened her eyes to the slantwise summer light and looked at the man by the window and did not reach for the sheet, only smiled at him sleepily as though he were the most ordinary miracle in the world, and asked what time it was and whether he had let her sleep in, and he had to turn to the window so she would not see what her ordinary sentence did to him. The greenhouse on the corner lot opened at the very end of that summer, and it was Mara's own, the ground deeded to her outright, Roland himself having had it done in her name in late August, arriving one afternoon with a single car and no lawyers to set the envelope on the terrace table where she could reach it. A woman who meant to open a greenhouse with a crooked sign and terrible coffee should own the ground it stood on herself, he had said. And when she read the first line aloud, he had added, in the dry ghost of the old verdict voice, that it was his apology. He did not do the spoken kind. His brother could. He never had learned. And Mara, who had no 3 years of him to resent and so could meet him fresh, had told him he would come to the opening and drink the terrible coffee and tell everyone it was the best he had had, because that was what apologies drink. He came. They all came. The morning of the opening she woke in the tall bright bedroom to the slantwise light and looked at her husband already awake in the chair where he still waited, close enough to reach and far enough not to frighten. Out of a habit neither of them wanted to lose. She told him he was staring again. "Lucky guess," said Julian, "that you'd want coffee. 2 sugars. Too much milk. Like dessert." She sat up, and she did not pull the sheet, and she did not ask who he was. For a man who could not tell a joke in July, she informed him, he was getting dangerously smug about the coffee. He set the cup in her hands and admitted he had been taking lessons from a difficult woman, one who fired him some mornings and kept his ego honest. It was the first joke of his she had ever laughed at twice, once in the room and once, later, remembering it. The corner lot, by noon, was full. The crooked hand-painted sign hung over the door, every plant labeled in Mara's own bad handwriting, and the coffee was so genuinely terrible that Winnie had drafted a formal letter of complaint and now stood by the till, arms folded, watching it be framed. 30 rooms in that house, and nobody swam. She informed a stranger buying a fern, but this Mara had built with her own 2 hands and half a brain the doctors were still arguing about. And Winnie had decided to be proud, and the stranger was not to tell her, because it would go to her head, and then she would water the ceilings. The place smelled of wet peat and cut stems and the green sappy warmth of 100 seedlings, and the bell over the door rang and rang. Ellen worked the register she had claimed as her own, ringing up terracotta pots and making change, and telling every second customer that her daughter had grown these from nothing, which was almost true and truer than she knew. Roland stood by the lavender in his bone-colored linen, holding a paper cup he had emptied to the grounds, and when a young couple asked him whether the coffee was any good, he said, without a flicker, that it was the finest he had had in years, and Mara, passing with an armful of white roses for the window, caught it and laughed the laugh that had undone Julian across a lunch table a whole life ago. She found him at the back of the glass house near closing, staking a leaning tomato she had forgotten in the rush, tying it off in a small, careful bow. He was doing it wrong, she told him, coming up beside him, smelling of soil and sun and cut roses. He crowded them, and they sulked. Everything deserved a little ceremony, he said, and she went still, because it was her line, 3 summers old, and she had just heard herself in his mouth. She had said that to him, she said slowly. Had she not? A long time ago. Second date, he told her, not looking up from the twine. She had tied a bow on a stake and told him everything deserves a little ceremony, and he had decided on the spot he would marry her if she would have him. She had had him at the bow. She was quiet a moment, the bees going low in the lavender by the door, the last gold of the day pouring through the glass and the leaves, and landing on the 2 of them like something poured. Then she reached out and pressed her thumb, once, to the ring on his left hand, turning it a 1/4 inch, on the near side of the wall now, and meaning to stay there. Next summer, she said, they would plant the corner by the door with jasmine, so it smelled like home when you walked in, so she would know it even on a morning she had lost the rest. She met his eyes, clear-eyed, choosing it, and warned him she would probably still fire him now and then. He would still say all right, Julian told her, and would still be here when she rehired him, on a trial basis, she said. On a trial basis, he agreed, and outside the swallows came, and she leaned her head on his shoulder among the green-growing things she had built with her own hands. A woman who had woken hating him, and would, by the mercy of a cracked open door, wake tomorrow already knowing his name. She fell for him every night still. She just, at last, got to wake up already there. If this story warmed something in you, if you believe the best love is the kind that chooses you clear-eyed again and again, and stays, then stay here with us a little longer. Subscribe to Platinum Diaries, and let the next story find its way to you. There is always coffee in the kitchen. 2 sugars. A great deal of milk. You take it like dessert. You always have.